first thing I would start with the yellow. So you want to almost color the outer edge, but what you want to do is to leave a blank white space. So if you could see, like each lemon has got like a highlight. So that bit is the part you have to make sure it's white. And the way I color is to be quite strong with the pigments, and then I use like a hatching technique. So you just have the same lines direction going the same way, and then leave a blank highlight. So like this, yeah. And then I would do maybe like 2 lemons back to back. So for example, if you've done these, because if you could see the brown shadows here, they tend to be darker when it's hidden behind the next lemon. So you should have the brown pencil too. So I'll do the same for the next lemon. You just kind of color out the outlines. But then when you get to the part where it's behind the other lemon, you would almost do, again, a hatching, like a shading technique. And then have these lines that smudged out. Hopefully you can see quite clearly. Watercolor is great to build up the layers, so you want to let each layer dry. So the first one, you wet your brush, and then you would notice it just turns into this lovely watercolor. And again, make sure you leave, when you get to that white spot in the middle, you're almost just kind of blending it, and make sure you keep that white space. So I will color the one on top first, because the shadows is brown obviously, and then that would it might blend it into the yellow. So you can see here, when you get to the shadows, the brown should just blend naturally. And keep cleaning the brush as well, because otherwise any colors that are darker, the pigment stays on the brush, and then it just kind of get quite messy. So keep the brush quite wet, and always remember to clean it. So hopefully you would have like your first layer. And one of the key point with watercolor really is to let it dry before you work on the next layer. So when it's dried, we would then add on the next layer for the lemon. So I would start adding more hatching technique on the outside with the brown, and a darker shade of yellow, but starting from the outer edge. So I'll show you what I mean. So I would make it quite gentle, and then just use the pen like a stroke from the same direction. And then you can use the yellow to go on top to blend it, to kind of soften the color. So if the more like texture and marks you want, the less wet it is. It's just more color pencil rather than the watercolor. But I find it quite nice to kind of do it like a mixed media piece, isn't it? So I don't know if can you see quite clearly, like if you have the edge, and then you just start doing these little pen strokes. Yeah, so you can see you start building up the shading, and then when you get to the shadow part of, you know, this one that's behind, you want to use the point of your pencil to almost like neaten the edge. So then you've got like a darker shape. Can you see? That's how you like emphasize it. So then you would blend it with this yellow. And the other thing I would do is when you get to the bottom, I don't know if you could see, if you look really closely, they had a little green tip, like a tiny green bit, but be very gentle, because otherwise the whole thing just becomes very green. And then once you've done working with that layer, you can just wet your brush again and then blend it some more. So each layer builds on top of the previous one, and then you start creating these like layers of shadings. You see that bit becomes a little bit stronger now. And then be very gentle with the green. I would say use quite a lot of water to soften the edge, just so it doesn't look like you know, it's not part of the lemon. You see here, so it's like a very subtle. And then whatever it, like if for example, whenever you paint something that's a darker color, like a brown or a green, you can use the remain pigment that is left on your brush for extra shadows. And the final shadows for the lemon would be the little cross hatching and the hatching shading. So once it's completely dry, I would add in about a third section of it perhaps. And then you would just start to shade them in a one direction line. So be quite delicate. And the other advice is also keep the color pencil quite sharp. You have the option here to either do a very gentle wash, so almost without blending it too much, but like a quick squiggle, but it just softens. Or if you actually prefer it to be more a color pencil looking, you can just leave it dry. So like I'll do the one behind. You would just draw a couple of lines. And I like to make the lines a bit more expressive. So let go a bit more. Watercolor, I think it's nice when you just let it flow a little bit more. And then a quick wash to just soften it. So then you have your highlights and your shadows, and then the whole thing just becomes a lot more three-dimensional. So for the leaves, I would almost color, so you would draw a outline on the outer edge of the leaves, because this is quite a strong color. So you'll notice even if I just draw the outside, the middle would, once you get it wet, it blends in. And then you would put a little bit of yellow. So if you could see. So I would just draw the central line, you know, that middle line down there first. And then in the highlight bit, I would add hints of yellow. So you can just like draw them a bit like this. So maybe we'll test out in 2 leaves as well. And then just add hints of yellow. And then the first layer, whenever you're ready, get the brush wet. And I will always point the tip of the brush towards the outside, just to get the line quite clean. And then you'd notice once it's wet, the whole thing kind of just smudge all over. And make this quite wet. And then the yellow you would find it blending into the green, and it turns into like a limey green. So it should start to look something like that before we add the next layer on. If you want any colors to be like much stronger, you can always, when you draw with the pencil, just be a little bit more aggressive, and then the more pigments would stay on the page. You might notice if the page is still wet and then you use the pencil on top, so you can do, I'll show you, like it. You can do little lines like that, but you just gotta be quite gentle if it's wet. I would normally prefer to wait for it to dry first, and you can smudge it with water, and then that gives you a next layer. So now I would add in the brown and the black for the shading. So the black, you might see here, can you see that all the tips? I would paint in here, the end, to make it like a really fine black point, but then gently, very, very gently, because the black is potent, just shade it out. So I'll zoom in. Can you see that? And also I would add a bit extra green, and then this time you can draw it in a form of the pattern of the leaves, and when that blends out, you start to see a very subtle texture. So yeah, the black can start at this root as well, the stem that's coming out, and right on the tip. So both ends, and in the middle bit it's the pattern. Then if you want to, any bit that's like, if you really observe the picture, there's some hints of yellow, like here for example, in the shadows. So you can really look at on your wreath, which lemon or which leaf do you think is hidden behind something, and then you can just make that bit darker with the brown. And then anything that you want to highlight, then add a bit of yellow. And then once you're done with this process, again, just give it a layer of wash. But I would start in the green bit before you get to the black, because then otherwise your brush gets very dirty quickly. So you can see it like softens the lines of the texture, but it's still there, like you can still see it. And then when you get to the black, you might start to notice how dark it does actually get. So I would bring my brush to like the pointy bit, facing the pointy bit of the leaves, and then the remain of the darker pigment on the brush would be great for adding in any shadows. And really, it's just building the layers. The more patience you have on adding the layers, the more realistic it becomes. And you've got quite a lot of lemons to go through there. So the leaves, you would literally keep going for maybe, I would say, 2 to 3 more times of that process. But once you've got to the end, I would draw a black line down the middle. So in that bit, like each of them has a black line, just to add a bit more definition. But now if your page is very wet, perhaps wait till it's a little bit dry. And like when you do it, make the pen, so like kind of let loose. If your wrist is a little bit more loose, you can see with like a control line or like a line with more, you see, like just a bit more delicate with flow. And then the flower, yeah, I nearly missed out the little white flower. So they're normally a white flower. So I would use a blend of the black and a hint of green. The stem here would definitely be green. So if you see any of those little bit of stems, I just draw a thick line and then a thin line. So it almost looks like a little highlight in the middle, and then you add on the bit in the bottom. And then the top, so I think on the drawing there are 2 types of flowers. There are some that looks like a bud like this, and then some are more kind of expressive, like a proper flower. So the little ones, I would just draw little very expressive thin lines, just a few, maybe like 3 on the bottom and 1 at the top, because when you blend it, when you put the water in, and again always brush pointing the outside, because the black is quite potent. And then you ended up with these shadows. You can see, but don't be afraid to leave the rest blank, because otherwise you might end up with a grey flower. So you want it to just be a tiny bit. Hopefully you can see. And then whatever is remain on the brush, you can either add on like the little petals, just very subtle hints of the black. If you can. So now I'm gonna zoom here. Can you see like that bit? It's so subtle. So then it still looks like a white flower rather than a grey one. Or if you do feel like you want to make it darker, you can use your black pencil, and I would just do 1 thin line on each of the flower here, and then blend it out. And then when you wet it, it should be very delicate. So it'd be something like this. And then your last bit is your bumblebee. So I would start with the yellow again. So always start with the light color. So on here, you can see the yellow part is just very subtle on the wing. So you want to color in the yellow bits. And I'll just do it like quite an aggressive zigzag line. But the 2 yellow lines on the wings there make it very delicate. And then I'll clean the brush, make sure the brush is clean from all the black and the brown. Then once you've done the yellow, I would do 1 wash of water, just to turn it all into watercolour. And a very, very fine wash on the wings. So it's like this. And then when you've got the yellow, hopefully it would dry quickly. On the outer edge of the yellow, you might see a hint of brown. All of that to create the texture. I would do on the body here. I'll turn it around so you can see. So here I would do like a zigzag line on the outer edge, like that. And then on the neck here, it's just a little bit to make it more like fluffy dots that are coming out of the body. And then start adding. If you have time, normally you would do a water wash first and let it dry, but because of timing, I would use the black first. So color it all in almost. So a gentle, don't be too dark, so keep it like kind of this level of color, and then just draw color in with a zigzag texture. So it's okay to leave a bit of blank, not like normal coloring where you have to fill the whole thing in. You're just kind of almost making it quite messy. And then it's okay to leave a bit of blank in the middle, kind of like a little child's doodle. And then the head as well. And at this point you can just draw a really fine lines on the antenna as well. Whenever you're done with the pencil, then swap it to a wet brush and just start blending. You can probably still see the texture of the lines. So like a very gentle wash. Because when that's dried, that's when we add the fluffiness with the pencil. So when you get to the neck, you know, the brown bit, just so here you can see it's like I'm just doing my brush like a little dots, and then you create these shadows. And again, when it comes to the wings is like the same technique as doing the white flower. So you can see it's just very, very delicate. But I would make the bit coming from the body darker. So here, the lines closer to the body, almost like express it out. And then when you get the wet wash, it should just be very subtle. The final step would be, once the body hopefully is completely dry, you can start adding these little textures so you can see the brush stroke on the fluffiness. So on the body, you would just draw like dotted lines. Make them quite expressive. Or the bit that are very dark, you can do a like this part, the part near the neck. You can draw it in like a zigzag line, just like rows of zigzag lines, and then have some dots. That you can even hear my pen. So you want to almost leave this part quite light. And then again, fluff it from the body onto the wings, so it doesn't look like the body and the wings are like glued on and not attached. So you have these lines here that you're almost dotting it out. Any parts that feels very dense, be quite aggressive and add more layers and lines on top. And any bits that are lighter, just leave it blank. And then finally, you can do one last layer of wash to just blend everything, but very gently, so you still get the pen strokes. And feel free to add the brown later on as well to give it some extra texture. And then make sure your brush is very, very pointy to finish the antenna. So you want to keep it very, very, very fine. Like there. If you get it like, because the wetness give it the smoothness that you want. And then you got the bee. That is all the technique, the lemon, the bee, you know it all. And I would just say, wait till it dries at the end, then it's just nice to have a layer that's unwashed. It's completely color pencil, like those bits. And then just make it super delicate.